Ready, Rampy? Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining Rampy and I on another book reading on Reading with Queen Bee. Thank you for subscribing to my channel. And don't forget, we are listening to the book reading of Because of Winn-Dixie by Kate DiCamillo. We are listening to chapter 12 today. And if you've missed any of the previous chapters, you can always go on my channel and catch up to chapter 12, where we're currently on. And those of you that are my students, don't forget at the end of each chapter reading, I will be asking you a question. You can answer it on your Google Classroom. And those of you that are just my subscribers, thank you very much for watching and for all your support and encouragement. So today we are listening to chapter 12, and we already know that Winn-Dixie actually has a pathological fear of lightning and thunder. And Rampy doesn't have a pathological fear. I think the only thing he doesn't like every dog, is fireworks and lightning and thunder. But he just barks. He doesn't go crazy like Winn-Dixie did in chapter 11. So we're going to find out what happens in chapter 12. We know that the preacher really just took care of Winn-Dixie and also told Opal that from here on out, they're going to have to be very careful with Winn-Dixie whenever there is thunder and lightning. So follow along. Chapter 12. Me and Winn-Dixie got to Gertrude's Pet so early for my first day of work that the closed sign was still in the window. But when I pushed on the door, it swung open, and so we went on inside. I was about to call out to Ottis that we were there, but then I heard music. It was the prettiest music I have ever heard in my life. I looked around to see where it was coming from, and that's when I noticed that all the animals were out of their cages. There were rabbits and hamsters and gerbils and mice and birds and lizards and snakes, and they were all just sitting there on the floor like they had turned to stone, and Ottis was standing in the middle of them. So you can visualize just this scene where all the animals are just amazed with the music, and they're just all calm, just sitting there listening to Ottis play his guitar. He was playing a guitar, and he had on skinny, pointy-toed cowboy boots, and he was tapping them while he was playing the music. His eyes were closed, and he was smiling. Winn-Dixie got a dreamy kind of look on his face. He smiled really hard at Ottis, and then he sneezed, and then his whiskers went all fuzzy, and then he sighed and kind of dropped to the floor with all the other animals. Just then Gertrude caught sight of Winn-Dixie. "Dog!" she croaked, and flew over and landed on his head. Ottis looked up at me. He stopped playing his guitar, and the spell was broken. So right there, if you have ever been pretty much like dancing, in your room or just dancing anywhere, and then you think you're alone and all of a sudden someone, sneaks up behind you, you sort of stop dancing and you're sort of like out of your trance, your dancing trance. So that's what happened to Ottis. He pretty much was surprised by Opal, so he stopped playing his guitar. The rabbits started hopping, and the birds started flying, and the lizards started leaping, and the snakes started slithering, and Winn-Dixie started barking and chasing everything that was moving, and Ottis shouted, "Help me!" For what seemed like a long time, me and Ottis ran around trying to catch mice and gerbils and hamsters and snakes and lizards. We kept on bumping into each other and tripping over the animals, and Gertrude kept screaming, "Dog! Dog!" Every time I caught something, I put it back in the first cage I saw. I didn't care if it was the right cage or not. I just put it in and slammed the door. And the whole time I was chasing things, I was thinking that Ottis must be some kind of snake charmer, the way he could play his guitar and make all the animals turn to stone. And then I thought, "This is silly," I shouted over Winn-Dixie barking and Gertrude yelling. I said, "Play some more music, Ottis." So right there, she found the solution to that problem. He looked at me for a minute, then he started playing his guitar, and in just a few seconds, everything was quiet. Winn-Dixie was lying on the floor, blinking his eyes and smiling to himself and sneezing every now and then. And the mice and the gerbils and the rabbits and the lizards and the snakes that we hadn't caught yet got quiet and sat still. And I picked them up one by one and put them back in their cages. When I was all done, Ottis stopped playing. He looked down at his boots. I was just playing them some music. It makes them happy. Yes, sir, I said. Do they escape from their cages? No, Ottis said. I take them out. I feel sorry for them being locked up all the time. I know what it's like being locked up. You do? I said. I have been in jail, Ottis said. He looked up at me real quick and then looked back down at his boots. You have? I said. Never mind, said Ottis. Aren't you here to sweep the floor? Yes, sir, I told him. He walked over to the counter and started digging through a pile of things, and finally he came up with a broom. Here, he said, you should start sweeping. Only he must have gotten confused. He was holding out his guitar to me instead of the broom. With your guitar? I asked. So right there, I think he just got a little bit nervous because he let Opal into his truth. He was in jail before. And now Opal is probably thinking, well, what could he have done wrong to have been locked up? Let's find out. He blushed and handed me the broom, and I started to work. I am a good sweeper. I swept the whole store and then dusted some of the shelves. The whole time I worked, Winn-Dixie followed me and Gertrude followed him, flying behind him and sitting on his head and his back and croaking real quiet to herself, Dog! Dog! When I was done, Ottis thanked me. I left Gertrude's pets thinking about how the preacher probably wouldn't like it very much that I was working for a criminal. So now she has made this judgment about Ottis, that he's a criminal, but yes, she does not know what he did. So let's see if her judgment of Ottis, of calling him a criminal, changes. Sweetie Pie Thomas was waiting for me right out front. I seen that, she said. She stood there and sucked on her knuckle and stared at me. Seen what? I said. I seen all them animals out of their cages and keeping real still. Is that man magic? She asked. Kind of, I told her. She hugged Winn-Dixie around the neck. Just like this grocery store dog, right? Right, I said. I started walking and Sweetie Pie took her knuckle out of her mouth and put her hand in mine. Are you coming to my birthday party? She asked. I surely am, I told her. The theme is pink, she said. I know it, I told her. I gotta go, she said all of a sudden. I gotta go home and tell my mama about what I seen. I live right down there in that yellow house. That's my mom on the porch. You see her? She's waving at you. I waved at the woman on the porch and she waved back, and I watched Sweetie Pie run off to tell her mama about Ottis being a magic man. It made me think about my mama and how I wanted to tell her the story about Ottis charming all the animals. I was collecting stories for her. I would also tell her about Miss Franny and the bear and about meeting Gloria Dump and believing for just a minute that she was a witch. I had a feeling that these were the kind of stories my mama would like, the kind that would make her laugh out loud, the way the preacher said she liked to laugh. So that's the end of chapter 12. And you can tell that Opal is collecting stories for her mom. And we're going to have to keep reading the story to find out if she actually has that opportunity to tell these stories to her mama. So one of the stories that I've been wanting to tell you is the story of Mr. Rampy. Mr. Rampy was born underneath one of my classroom ramps, and I was fortunate enough to take him in to our home, and that's the story of Rampy. And that's the story behind his name too, Rampy. That's why we named him Rampy, and he has been such a great, great asset to the family, or a great family member that we added. So one of the things that I want to know now for your Google Classroom question is, do you think that Opal will be able to tell her mom all of these stories she's collecting? And then also, do you collect anything? Think about it. So you have two questions now Do you collect anything? Write about it. And do you think Opal will be able to tell all of these stories to her mama? And please remember, if you want to keep buzzing about books, keep reading with Queen Bee. Bye.